Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I am not in my usual filming place this week. I'm in my bedroom just because I'm having so much trouble with my lights at the minute. It's a whole thing and I was gonna fix them and everything, but then I was like, what if I don't get this done in time and there's no video? So I thought I'd rather film and be somewhere random than no video. This case is about a man called Mick Philpott who was born in 1956 in England. I also want to give an extra little warning for this case that there is talk of domestic abuse and it involves children too. So if you're sensitive to anything like that, just go and watch a different video. I couldn't find much about Mick's childhood, but I do know that he was trained in the army. At 19 years old, he was described as being a really confident person, but with that confidence, he was also really arrogant, really cocky, and extremely narcissistic. He constantly wanted attention and he was the life and soul of the party, but kind of for the wrong reasons. He just wasn't a very nice person. Mick's girlfriend Kim Hill was born on the 11th of June 1961 and she was the youngest of 3 kids. Her mum's name was Shirley and her dad was an army officer called Bill who wasn't around too much. But although he wasn't around too much, they were still all a really close family. As a family, they moved around quite a bit, and when Kim's dad came out the army, they all moved from Chester to Derby. In 1976, Kim was 15 years old and she described herself as being a bit of a tomboy, and one day she was just out hanging out with her friends and there was a group of lads hanging out as well, and in that group was Mick Philpott, who was 19 years old. He was in the army at the time and I think Kim really liked the idea of someone who was, so strong and so confident, and he asked for a number, so she was made up to give him it, and it kind of all went from there. She said that the relationship with Mick gave her butterflies like new relationships tend to. She was just really into having an older boyfriend. She just thought he was amazing. He was like an older person. He was so wise and she really liked him. But unfortunately, all the nice things about the relationship didn't last too long. Mick started being really paranoid and was convinced that Kim was cheating on him and accusing her constantly of being with other boys when she wasn't. Mick didn't just argue though, he soon turned to violence with Kim. They were arguing one day about her cheating on him and he actually hit her. The first time he hit her, he burst out crying, started apologising and was like, "Don't tell me, Dad," which just shows the kind of person he is. Absolute coward. And promised that he would never do it again, and she actually said she felt sorry for him. Mick was really begging Kim not to leave him and she decided to stay with him, but things got really bad. There was one incident at a pub which really stuck with me and made me feel really just horrendous for Kim. Kim was sat talking to her cousin and Mick was playing snook with his friends and they all needed a partner to play, so Mick said to Kim, "Come and be my partner," and she was like, "Oh no, I'm speaking to my cousin," and cause she said no to him, he got the thick end of the snooker cue and smacked her across the mouth with it, which busted her lip straight away. It was bleeding everywhere. She ran out and he went out and dragged her back in and made her just sit down and sit there with her lip pouring with blood, and none of the people in the pub did anything to intervene. I cannot imagine sitting there just watching that happen. I really can't. It's absolutely horrible. And things didn't stop there. He got more and more violent the more stuff he was getting away with. He'd punched her, cracked her cheekbones, broken her nose, bit her and bent her fingers back and broke them. I read somewhere that he'd shot her in the leg with a crossbow because he thought that her dress was too short one day. And I read too that when she was once paying too much attention to a baby she was looking after, he'd got her knee and held it. I can't even say it. He'd got her knee. He'd taken her knee, held it in place, got a hammer and smashed her knee. She didn't tell anyone. It just makes me so sad that she felt like no one was there for her. This poor lady, oh my gosh. And she was only 16 at the time as well. Even for a fully grown woman, it's absolutely horrific. But she was 16, she was a child. Because she was a child, she was still in school and the school were noticing bruises on her and she had to say that she'd been in all these fights. Then the school would ring her dad and tell him she'd get in trouble. She was just constantly covering for Mick and didn't know who to turn to with this. In 1978, Kim and Mick had been together for about 3 years and she just had enough. She started looking at other relationships and other people her age and kind of noticed that hers wasn't like that, because In her first relationship, she didn't know what to expect. I think she knew that this wasn't normal, but she just kind of didn't put it together and be like, this completely isn't right. She realised that her boyfriend wasn't letting her do what all the other girls were doing, and she just thought, I don't want this for the rest of my life. So she wrote him a letter and she ended it with him. I'm not sure how he reacted initially, obviously because it was sent through a letter, we don't really know. It wasn't face to face and she couldn't see his reaction, but a few days later he called and said, can I have my records back? So she was like, yeah, of course, I'll take them round to you. Took them round to the box and he was like, oh, there's some missing. And she was like, no, I've checked, my dad's checked, these are everything that I've got of yours. And he leaned into her and just said, this isn't over. So she was terrified. She knew that obviously he hadn't taken it well in the end. She went back home and carried on life as normal. On July the 4th, 1978, Kim went out with one of her friends and she was just having a nice time going out, you know, as teenagers do. And Mick was actually following her this whole time and she didn't know. He'd followed her all the way home. She'd gone in, she'd gone to bed. He'd kind of, I think, lingered outside and waited until the coast was clear. Kim's dad went to work at 12 at midnight, so he'd waited until he left and then Mick had actually entered the house. He'd sat in the living room for about 2 hours and was just going through lots of stuff. He emptied Kim's purse and he was going through just drawers and things. I'm not really sure why, but in the drawer he found her dad's flip knife. Mick took the flip knife upstairs to Kim's room and he put his hand over her mouth while she was asleep, which caused her to wake up. And he just said, if you scream, I'm gonna kill you. He moved his hand and the first thing she did was scream. And Mick said to her, if I can't have you, no one can. He took the flip knife and he started stabbing her in the chest. I've seen places that say 27 times and I've seen places that say 15 times. Either way, a whole lot of times to get stabbed. Kim just thought she was being punched at first. She didn't actually know that she was being stabbed. She said she remembers her mum coming to her bedroom door because obviously they were making a racket. She could hear that something was going on. And then next thing, Mick was not in the room and her mum was gone. Mick had actually chased Kim's mum down the stairs and stabbed her as well in the back. And it was just the fact of he was getting rid of anyone who was standing in the way of this. He stabbed Kim's mum 11 times in the back, but then he wasn't finished with this. He decided to go back upstairs to Kim while she was lying there just bleeding, and he took the knife and he cut her whole stomach just completely open, trying to gut her. Obviously by now 2 people had been attacked, so there's a lot of stuff happening, and I think her sister was in the house too, so a lot of noise. The neighbours heard everything and called the police. But when the police came, Mick was apparently sat on the stairs, laughing and still holding the knife that he just used to attack these 2 women, just saying, I wouldn't bother, she's a goner, I've done a good job on her. Kim died twice on the way to the hospital. She'd been completely cut open, both of her lungs had been punctured, he'd got her liver, her bladder, her bowel, most of her organs had been punctured by the knife. Kim woke up a week later in hospital and she had to spend 4 months there. Over the years, Kim had to have tons of operations and unfortunately she had to have a hysterectomy as well because she was just that badly damaged. And she says that Mick's ruined her life, which I can completely understand. I feel so sorry for this lady. She was dragged into this so early on and this horrible man couldn't take no for an answer and just decided to do this to her, and her mum as well. It's just absolutely horrible. Mick was arrested for attempted murder and also for GBH on Shirley, Kim's mum. His trial took place in December of 1978 and he was found guilty on both charges. He was given 7 years for attempted murder and 5 years for GBH, which I'm sure you'll agree just doesn't sound like enough whatsoever for this. I would have thought it was attempted murder for her mum as well, because like, what were you trying to do? The judge said during sentencing that he was a really, really dangerous man. And Mick actually wrote to Kim from prison saying that he was sorry, he didn't mean to cause any harm. Again, what were you trying to do? Saying that they could pick up where they left off when he got out and he loved her and just all sorts. Kim showed her parents and was just like, what the hell is he doing? Then took her to the police and just said, keep this man away from me. And I'm so glad she did this. I'm so glad. And you know what? Usually this would be the part, it's like, oh, there's an attack or a murder or an attempted murder. There's a trial, there's a sentence. And then I'd usually be like, thanks so much for watching this video, but you'll notice that there's a lot more time on this video. And that's because just 3.5 years after his sentencing, he was released from prison. As soon as he was out, he was looking for another relationship and he found one. He got married to a woman called Pamela Lomax in 1986. They had 2 sons and a daughter together, but Pamela said he was massively controlling and she just prayed that he would move on to someone else, which he did. He met a girl, emphasis on girl, not woman, called Heather Kehoe, or Kehoe. I'm really sorry, I don't know how to pronounce her second name, but she was 14 years old. He was 37 at this point. And on his 16th birthday, Heather ran away from her parents to go and live with him. She had 2 kids with him, which she gave birth to really quickly, one after the other, but he wanted a daughter, so he started to abuse her because she hadn't given him a daughter. He said that if she tried to run away from him, he'd do the same to her as he did to Kim. And he'd even teach his sons to be really violent towards their mum, which is just horrible. Like, why would you do that? Obviously, he had absolutely zero respect for women. I don't even need to say that, like, clearly. It's said as well that he never actually did anything bad to men. It was always to women. He was just a massive coward. He would never say anything to the men. In 1991, he was in trouble with the police again because he'd headbutted a colleague. Not sure what brought that on, but in 2000, he met a lady called Mairead Duffy, who was 19 years old, and Mick was around 45 at this time. Mairead came from an abusive relationship and already had a child from that relationship. She became pregnant with Mick's child pretty quick as well, and then moved in shortly after. And people tried to look after Mairead. They were saying, get out, he's not a good man. A lot of people knew what he was like, a lot of people didn't, but the people who did were trying to help her get out of that situation. There was a lady who was offering her a house saying, you know, you can come here, it's safe, just please get out of that situation that you're in. But she said no, she was happy where she was and there was not much that anyone could do for her because she just wasn't willing to leave at that point. She was seen a lot with bruises, but she'd never admit that it was Mick. Mairead got a job at a hospital as a cleaner, which she really loved. She was described as being happy-go-lucky in work, but then she'd get really, low and sad and quiet and kind of go into herself when it was time for her to go home and be picked up by Mick at the end of the day. In 2001, Mick met a girl. She was 16 and she was an orphan and a single mum. This woman has been given a different identity since, but I still don't want to use her name that was, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to call her, someone give me a name, I'm trying to look around for inspiration. I'm just going to call her Sarah. I just feel a bit weird, like, out of respect for her. In 2002, Mick invited Sarah to go and live with them, and after that they started a relationship together. He started abusing her as well, beating her with bits of wood. So at this point he had 2 girlfriends, one that was around 19, 20, one that was 16, and they all lived together with their children that they had. And Sarah was actually the bridesmaid at the wedding of Mick and Mairead, and she was pregnant at the time with Mick's baby. It was all very strange. I honestly can't keep track of when each child was born because he was having kids with both of them, so they were both pregnant at the same time, both having kids at the same time. But I know that at one point altogether there was about 11 children living in the house. Not at the time of their wedding, I mean in general there was 11 kids and the 3 adults. So 11 kids, 3 adults all living in this house. And friends and neighbours said that even though there were so many kids living in this house, they were all really looked after, they were really nice kids, they were really well behaved. They weren't neglected or anything, but Mick didn't really have much to do with them. Apparently he would just kind of sit in his chair, watch telly, wasn't really involved with the kids. But something else about Mick was that he point blank refused to work. He just didn't want to. He was living in a council house. He had all these children that he would get benefits for. His wife and girlfriend both worked and they'd give their paychecks directly to him and they'd have to ask him to spend their own money. I could go off, but I'm not going to. I'm going to keep it to the things, otherwise this will be like 2 hours long. And because of all the kids that were living there, he actually requested a bigger house in 2006 from the council. At that point, I think there was about 8 kids living there and the 3 adults. And this brought on a lot of media attention. He was labelled Shameless Mick for asking for this because, as I said, he had no interest in getting a job himself or supporting his family. He just wanted to be given things. and he thought he deserved it. Mick had quite a lot of TV appearances which he really loved. Some of them were about him wanting the bigger house, some of them were about his strange situation with his wife and his girlfriend. He actually went on Jeremy Kyle as well. Anne Widdecombe did a documentary that Mick appeared into where she'd try and get him to change his lifestyle and try and be encouraging to him, and she actually found him 3 jobs, but he just didn't turn up. In it as well, he just speaks to her absolutely horribly. In this documentary, Mick had a caravan at the back of his house which he slept in. I think it may have started as part of the like, oh look how small the house is, I have to sleep in a caravan. But in the documentary, because obviously he just can't stop making things about himself, he says that every night he alternates between which woman goes in there with him, and he makes a lot of comments about things. But he's so made up with it, and he says that everyone's jealous of him. Anne Widdecombe also noticed that none of the children wanted to really be around him. Not in a like they were frightened of him way, I don't think they really saw him as dad. They didn't want cuddles from him, they didn't seek that from him. He also said on telly, he sat there's a clip of him, he's like, oh, I don't care if my wife's listening right now. If I'm out and someone's showing interest in me, there's no way I'm turning this down because I'm something like a hot-blooded male. I don't know, I feel like it's cringing. It's really cringy to watch him, just the way he talks about himself, and you're just like... In 2010, Mick was given a police caution because he was caught slapping his wife and dragging her by the hair. In 2011 as well, he'd punched another driver and was driving, dangerously, so he was in trouble with the police for that as well. So he was getting in trouble quite a lot. He wasn't about to change his ways. Or, I mean, if he's just getting slaps on the wrist every single time, what do you expect from that kind of person? So Sarah, who was Mick's girlfriend, left in February of 2012. She'd had enough of the living situation, she just had enough of him, and she went to live with her sister and brother-in-law, and she took her 5 kids, so 1 from a previous relationship and 4 of Mick's kids with her. And as we know, when Mick doesn't have control of a situation, he gets very violent and very angry, and this incident was no exception. He was incredibly frustrated by this. I don't think he actually cared the fact that his girlfriend had left and the kids had gone. I think it was more the fact, you've left and I didn't say you could. This is out of my control. I can't control this situation, so I'm gonna just be angry and violent and see what happens because I'm not used to not having my own way, basically. And he decided he wasn't gonna be directly violent to Sarah. He was gonna do something else. He needed to come up with a plan to do something horrific and frame Sarah for it so he could have custody of the kids. And that's just what he did. Mick, Mairead and a family friend, Paul Mosley, all planned to set fire to the family house while all the kids were asleep in there, save them and then pin it on Sarah so they could get custody of the kids again. And all of them were fine to go along with this. They planned to do this the early hours of the morning of the day that they were due in court to have the hearing over the children. On the 11th of May 2012, Mick and Mairead put all the kids to bed just as they normally would, but with the plan that they were going to set this fire. The 3 of them started drinking and eventually they started having a threesome downstairs while the kids were all asleep upstairs in their room. And shortly after that, around 3:30 in the morning, they set a fire. I've seen some reports that said they set fire to the stairs, and I've seen some that says it was in the letterbox, it was like through it. Mairead was the one to call 999, and there's a recording of that phone call as well. 2 brothers who live nearby, Jamie and Darren Butler, saw and heard everything going on, and they just went straight out to try and help. Neighbours said that Mick and Mairead were just standing in the garden just watching the flames, not with much emotion, but the emotion they had was said to be extremely forced. The 2 brothers who were the neighbours were trying to get on top of the caravan to go inside the window to try and get the kids out. They were trying to get one of the kids, Jade, out, and he just said he just couldn't get in, he couldn't reach her, and he feels so guilty for that. Jamie was trying to get in, but he said it was just like putting your mouth over a car exhaust and inhaling. It was really just impossible to breathe. He was choking on smoke and he couldn't save the kids. The fire brigade came out and Mairead told them where the kids were, but they said again there was not much emotion from her. Most people in this situation would be absolutely hysterical, but she was just like, oh yeah, they're all in their room. They started bringing the children out and trying to resuscitate them, but from most of the kids there wasn't a response. After trying to resuscitate them for a while, some of the kids were sent off in ambulances, which meant that they hadn't made it. Jamie, the man who tried to save them, actually apologised to Mick that he couldn't save his children. The only child that was actually showing a bit of a response was Dwayne, who was the eldest, and he was taken to hospital and put on life support. And Dwayne was Mairead's son from a previous relationship. 5 days after the fire, Mick decided he wanted to do a TV appeal, so they let him. He was fake crying again, there wasn't a single tear. He didn't even ask for someone to come forward with information about who set the fire. He was just making it kind of all about him, trying to thank everyone, make this big dramatic speech about how grateful he was for everyone who helped. And the news people noticed that there was just something not quite right about it. He started crying hysterically, so one of the officers took him out the room. They said that in the corridor that was past the door that they were going in and out of, he just collapsed to the floor. But he likened it to when a toddler's pretended to fall over and be dead dramatic. It was apparently just all really forced. And lots of people in the community were really saddened by this fire, obviously, and they started trying to raise money for the family. But people were becoming extremely suspicious about the way they were acting. Sadly, their plan kind of worked. Sarah was arrested for this and she hadn't anything to do with it. He took his friend to the mortuary to see his kids, and he actually ended up comforting his friend. He again didn't really show any emotion. In the hospital, he grabbed a girl's bum when his son, or his stepson, either way, a child he was connected to was on life support. Friends also noticed that he wasn't in the room constantly with Dwayne, and neither was Mairead, which you would be. They were going shopping, Mick was on karaoke 2 weeks later, just acting completely fine. Mairead's family went to see Dwayne at around 2 p.m. one day, thinking that she'd been there constantly not getting a break. They said, "Do you want us to take over for an hour so you can get a cup of tea and have a break?" And she was like, "Yeah, definitely." She didn't come back till 11 p.m. that night with, I think, love bites all over her neck. They didn't actually say, but it was suggested. The police knew that petrol had been found inside the letterbox, which meant this was a murder investigation. The neighbours had said as well, "You need to look into these people, there's something not right about this whole situation." Luckily, Sarah had an alibi, so she wasn't charged with anything. Nothing was taken further with her. Because their house had been destroyed, Mick and Mairead were put up in a hotel room by the police, which was booked. And they could hear loads of conversations going on from inside the hotel room, including them saying to each other like, "Oh, did you cry when you said this? How bad did you cry? Are we sticking to the story? Like, what did you say to the police?" Just lots of really weird things. A petrol container and a glove had been found thrown out by the house, and there was also petrol found on Mick, Mairead's and Paul's clothing. Luckily, because of this, they were all arrested on suspicion of murder. In their interviews, they all said about how they heard a pop and saw a big bright orange light and described it as coming towards them, and they were actually describing the lighting of the fire, which they wouldn't have seen had they not been in the room. All of their charges were reduced to manslaughter because they hadn't intended to kill their kids, which is just, again, crazy. You can't put someone in that amount of danger and not kind of have the thought, "Oh, this might go wrong." They all pled not guilty, but they were found guilty. Mick was given life with a minimum of 15 years. Mairead and Paul were both given 17 years. Mick shows no remorse over any of this. He wrote a letter to his friend about all the things he was going to do to Mairead once they saw each other. And he was also talking about really sexual things through the trial of his children's deaths as well. He's just a really strange man. It was unnecessary. So that is this week's case. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry if this ending's become a little bit choppy in the way it's been edited. I have got children playing out in the street and they're screaming. So I can't really do much about that, unfortunately. You don't know how much I've repeated the last section of this. I'd be like halfway through a sentence and then they'd be like, "Rah!" So I've tried my best. I'm sorry if you can still hear them a bit in the background. So let me know what you thought about this case. I think I've made it quite clear what I thought about Mick as a person. I don't know why they thought that it wouldn't go wrong, if they even thought that far ahead. Thank you so much for watching. I upload a true crime video every single Sunday, so please like, subscribe, all the good stuff. As I've said before, it really helps my channel when you do stuff like that. It makes YouTube know that people like the videos, which is always nice. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram if you haven't already. I will often post my videos there first or ask questions about them. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one.